everybody. Welcome to .NET Rocks, the internet audio talk show for .NET developers. As always in New London, Connecticut, this is your host, Carl Franklin.
And here in Atlanta, Georgia, Mark Dunn. How's it going, Carl?
It's going well, Mark. Interesting week. A few things have happened, and I have no idea what they were.
I don't know. I was dodging tornadoes, so,
Right. Well, that was last weekend.
I had other things on my mind.
That was last weekend, remember? I think the reason why we're having this time warp is because we're actually recording this prematurely. So last week hasn't actually happened yet, has it?
No, it hasn't. But, I was just, going to make it sound like we were recording next week.
You were trying to just pull the wool over everybody's eyes. Well, we figured...
I'm diabolical that way.
We'd just come clean and say right off the bat that, we have no idea what happened this week because we're recording it during the week. So with that all out of the way, Mark, what's new with you?
Oh, not a lot. I've been relaxing this week. I haven't been teaching, so I guess I taught like 7 weeks in a row, something like that.
Oh wow!
So I figured it was time to take a little break.
Hey, I just got off a 7-day in a row stint, and
you're a madman. You do the Monday through Friday, and then follow it up with a weekend class.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm a masochist or something. But it was good class. They were all good classes. And I always enjoy seeing the light bulbs go on. I think that's why I do it.
Yeah, it always seems like I pick up something new from each class I teach. Did you run into anything enlightening in the class you taught last week? Yeah,
as a matter of fact, I did. I had a guy who had some remoting questions that we sat down and worked out some stuff together after hours. The guy was here till midnight every night, and we worked through some stuff and got some good code out of it.
Now that's a hardcore student.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yep, it was fun, and I learned a few things too. Anyway, this is going to be a great show, and this is sort of in terms of topics, we're almost going to go back to the very first show that I did with Pat Hines today, because in that show, our guest was mentioned by Pat, and we've talked quite a bit about this elusive pet store application, which was written by Sun to show everybody, what the best practices are for Java development in J2EE. And so then some people from a company in California, Vertigo Software, wrote this very simple .NET version of it that just completely outperformed it. And so then the Java community out there cried foul, saying, well, we weren't really focused on performance. And so then they had a few more months to come up with another version, and they did just a few weeks ago. And that version still isn't anywhere close to the .NET in terms of scalability and performance. And now they're crying foul again, saying that, Microsoft paid for the results, which is not true, because they had a hand in setting up the lab, but had invited Sun to a hand-to-hand contest in a public arena many times, and Sun declined. So
right, I was thinking the company that did this was called the Middleware Company, is
yes,
that right?
Yes, the Middleware Company.
Right. And they're objective, aren't they?
Well, they're fundamentally a Java shop, and Microsoft helped set up the whole thing, and they helped, but they had no influence on the outcome. These are real numbers that this company gathered. Before I get into that, I think we'd like to let our guest talk a little bit more about it, because he is a regional director from... Where are you the regional director from?
Well, technically, so our company is in Point Richmond, but I'm the regional director for Silicon Valley, which is a hotbed of .NET activity, because no one does Java down here.
Right.
So it makes our job very easy.
Well, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, will you please welcome Scott Stanfield?
Hi, everyone.
How are you?
This is my first .NET radio show. My name is Scott Stanfield. I'm the CEO of a company called Vertigo Software, and we are located in beautiful downtown Point Richmond, which has got about 3,000 people. I walk 3 blocks to work, but we're still in the Bay Area, so it's kind of a nice juxtaposition of the big city, yet we actually have a barbershop with a little pole outside.
Oh, very good.
And I know the Butcher, so it's this kind of nice little Mayberry feel.
So is it kind of like Joel Fleshman, you know?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great show.
It was, wasn't
Northern
it?
Exposure. That was such an awesome show.
I loved that show.
That was what prompted me and my wife to take our honeymoon to Seattle, actually.
Wow.
In that area, because it was filmed around there.
Yeah, I've never seen so many senior citizen actors in one show.
That was pretty good.
But they were all great, weren't they?
They were great. That was a great show.
That was the kind of show you're either into or you weren't.
Yeah, it was definitely on the edge. Now my TiVo is mostly full with The Simpsons and Monster Garage and Junkyard Wars, because I can watch the latter two with my son. He's 5. We have a lot of fun.
Yeah, we like the Monster Garage as well.
You know what? I think there's a programming show lurking in there somewhere between. I like the cooking channel, the food channel.
Yeah, Emeril Lagasse. Bam, kick it up.
Oh, he's great. You know, and I'm killing myself. You can't eat software, but it's actually, there's a good segue here, because you have these different chefs on there that bring a personal style to the food that they create. And there's an analog in the software world where we like to say, this is the right way to build a souffle, or this is the right way to build a lasagna.
Right.
Well, people have different ways, different styles, and they have different requirements.
Except that we have forums where they come out and actually, slam dunk each other, sort of more like wrestling.
Oh, it's insane. Let me give you some background on kind of the pet shop and just where we are with all that.
That's exactly what I wanted to ask.
So Vertigo, our company does a lot of work for Microsoft, and they pay us in cold hard cash to do things that they either don't have the expertise to do or don't want to do, or frankly, they're a big company. They have budget issues and headcount issues, and they have a lot of things on their agenda and a lot of things that they want to get done, and they want to evangelize their products and technology. So sometimes they turn to us to try to pull some things together and document how projects work. And to go way back to, I think it's maybe 1999, Greg Leak, who at the time was the product manager for Visual InterDev it was.
InterDev.
Said that, look, we've got people building web applications today cover a lot of different technologies that at Microsoft they are kind of independent groups. So, for example, we have database access through ADO. We have the database itself, SQL Server. We have languages either in VB6, we have to register them with COM, and we use Visual InterDev. Now, all those are different product groups at Microsoft. And so to get architectural guidance or get development guidance around how to pull those things together, he said, why don't, he said, Vertigo, go create some fictitious scenario. And I chose the stock market because at the time I happened to be into the Motley Fool. And I thought, hey, this would be a cool way to do some real stock analysis on some real data. And also it made good sense to build a scenario around the stock, like a stock trading site, because it was plausible that you'd want to use transactions and have it be high volume.
Absolutely.
And so, we kind of set up the project, and here's the timeline. We want to get done by a certain point. But the important thing is that we were trying to create a piece of code that people could learn from. The word best practices wasn't around then, frankly, and if I hear that word one more time, I'm going to shoot myself.
Yeah.
There's a lot of buzzword bingo that we do in this industry that just drives me nuts, and that's certainly one of them. But it was an honest endeavor, and we thought, look, along the way, let's make sure that the code is fast, because in the heyday of the internet, especially around '99, it had to be pretty high performant and highly scalable. And right out of the gates, we crashed at 16 users because we didn't have the right service pack of NT4 installed. So that was a lesson in humility. We eventually, the whole project culminated on stage with Steve Ballmer. We had about 15,000 concurrent users simulated, and all the pages were coming back in less than a second. And so to do this in Windows DNA, in VB6, and COM with transactions and SQL Server, et cetera, on a relatively inexpensive platform was really unheard of at the time. And so the code and the documentation made itself out as Fitcham Stocks. The URL is fitchamstocks.com. And that was kind of, someone even called it the Rosetta Stone for Windows DNA applications. And frankly, the only thing, the real kernel of good stuff there was the use of stored procedures in the database and having a clean way of accessing a shared resource, which was the database. As long as we also put state in the database, which at the time was unheard of. Now you have that option with ASP.NET, but it just gave us better performance. But I challenged the listeners to come up with a high-performant piece of code, yet still be able to look at yourself in the mirror in the morning, because you have to make trade-offs between high performance, which can lead to some pretty ugly-looking code. there was a C++ version done as an ISAPI filter of the same application, and it was a lot faster, but it was not maintainable, and only a few people could work with it.
Go figure.
So that, yeah, exactly. So that was the genesis of the kind of performance projects outside of the realm of the TPC. That was more of like the world of, Microsoft definitely funded it. It wasn't really a benchmark. It was just hey, we got some code here. By the way, it's really fast.
Let me interrupt you and ask you to define an acronym. I am the acronym policeman. TPC?
Oh, it's a Transaction Processing Council.
Okay.
So if you go to tpc.org, you see probably one of the most respected database benchmarks. Microsoft has certainly made some tremendous headway into cracking the top 10. I think they own all the spots in one of the major TPC benchmarks, whereas just over 5 years ago, I don't even think they were on it. So they've come a long way in terms of the raw performance and throughput of the platform.
So it's an organization?
Yes, it's an independent organization. They do independent verification of benchmarks.
Is it not just database, but all sorts?
It's mostly database. The benchmarks that most people are concerned about is the TPC-C benchmark. There's a TPC-W benchmark, which is a web-based benchmark, but it's never really caught on. And we can get back to that. Get back to that in a minute because it's an interesting area.
That's a pretty good history of your company, and that explains a lot. I didn't know that you guys did Fitch and Mather.
It was a fun project. I personally was involved in Fitch and Mather Stocks 2000.
Very cool.
Eventually, Microsoft took it and ported it to .NET, and so the current version is FM Stock 7, which ships with Visual Studio.NET. We didn't have much to do with that version. In fact, it could be tweaked a little bit to take advantage of things that we have all learned in the interim. But frankly, building best practices around a product when it is in an alpha state is kind of a farce.
Yeah.
It's hard to do that because best practices, I got to stop using that word. Let's just call it wisdom. That's what it is. Wisdom comes from experience, which requires time.
Yes.
It also requires your feet in the fire. You don't get that necessarily when you're dealing with alpha code.
Well, there's a few things that, based on the architecture, that are easy to figure out.
That's right. You do start to recognize generic patterns of access, and certainly there's the GOF patterns, which are the Gang of Four patterns. They're commonly used in the Java community. They are language-independent patterns, and they crop up in the applications that we develop. But the Visual Studio.NET world is more. We tend to focus on construction,
right?
And certainly in the areas of benchmarks, we do try to strike a balance between performance and maintenance and readability and reliability of the code. But it's a fine line. It kind of goes back to the thing. Like I like to make my French toast a little bit different than you might like to make yours.
Right.
Does that mean my way is the best?
It's funny you brought up cooking shows because we're going to be doing a sunny day video cooking show.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be fun.
That'd be.
I'm not going to say anything more about it, but it's going to be a gas.
Well, it's going to be a hoot.
Well, anyway, let's jump over to the pet shop application now.
Let's fast forward. So, Sun has a book out, and their canonical sample for building enterprise applications, and those are their words, not mine. Come from this thing called the Java Pet Store.
Okay.
And Pet Store, Pet Shop, I'll probably use them interchangeably.
Right.
And we ported a version. We ported it to .NET. At the time thinking there are folks moving from the Java community to .NET, and what better way to introduce them to this world than by starting with an application that they're probably already familiar with.
So what was Sun's intent when they created the pet shop? Were they not focused on performance like they say they weren't? What's the deal there?
I think they were truly focused on architecture for architecture's sake.
Okay.
Which is a dangerous thing to do if you're trying to make money in this industry.
Ask any object-oriented purist.
Yeah, exactly. I cut my teeth on object-oriented programming. I have a computer science background.
Yep.
I got a degree in it. I learned Booch diagrams and object-oriented programming. The problem is that model doesn't work as well on the web. On the web, you're dealing with more of a transactional programming model.
Data-centric.
When you can measure your profit per second or measure the business operations per second, that's a far cry from building up and tearing down a large, complicated, object-oriented infrastructure in your application. It's one of the reasons why the applications that we build at Vertigo are more database-focused and transactional-focused.
So they never really said this was a benchmark of performance?
No. Now, what happened?
Okay.
Oracle then took the application and said, on their Oracle application server, it's really fast, and this is how fast it is.
Okay.
So I think they kind of opened the door, so to speak, for a challenge from Microsoft. So Microsoft paid us. We have no problem saying that. They pay us for a lot of projects. They said, port this thing to .NET, come up, use our lab, and let's just see how fast we can make this thing go. And because we had a baseline that which were the numbers that Oracle had, we had a fairly easy target because Oracle, maybe they never thought that it would be challenged or, but if you post numbers are an easy target. And so the two basic numbers that we came back with, our code, I believe, I'm trying to remember from memory, we came back and showed at the PDC that I think we were 1/4 the amount of code.
Right.
I could be wrong, but it's roughly 25% of the amount of code. And
also,
that
was about 3,500 lines. Is that right?
Yeah, I probably have the documents here somewhere, but it was about 1/4 the size. So about.
I remember it was 14,000 lines for the original Pet Store, and I think it was 3,500.
That sounds about right.
Roughly for the C# version that you did.
Now, if the code is within factor of 2, I would say maybe that's not that interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're that far apart in terms of the code size, I'd say that's a pretty interesting fact, and something that is overlooked because the next number was the pure performance, and it was 2,800% faster.
Wow.
Or 28 times faster. Now, granted, the person that moves last always has the advantage because you have something to target.
So how long did it take them to come up with a new version, and what was their aim in doing that?
Well, let me tell you, our version we built with 2 people in 5 weeks.
Wow.
And one of the developers in the project had never done .NET before.
Wow.
And he's a talented programmer, and he's been doing a ton of Windows DNA work, but it was his first .NET project.
How much training did he have?
None.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, this was just based on...
Smart guy.
Yeah, he's a good guy, and...
Is he a VB guy or a C++ guy?
He actually co-wrote one of my C++ books, so his name's Ralph Arvison.
Okay.
So C++, MSc, he'd been doing VB6 programming as well.
So he latched on to C# probably.
Oh, yeah, C# is a lot of fun. So picking up C# if you've done C++ programming or Java programming for that matter is pretty natural. And once you learn the namespaces, I mean, let's face it, guys, after 10 years in this industry, you start seeing patterns, these meta patterns of similar concepts coming and going.
Right.
And so it's not terribly difficult. There are definitely some new concepts in ASP.NET, like just the state service and the cache API. Well, not a new concept, but it was new to our platform.
They're back there in the Jungian collective unconscious of programming somewhere.
That's right. And there definitely is one, and boy, we're shaking things up with this pet shop. So, we built it, a couple guys, 5 weeks, spent a lot of time in the lab. And a lot of the work there is a physical lab in Redmond with, I don't know, maybe 100 workstations to generate load on a gigabit backplane with a bunch of compact equipment. I think they're what are they, 1850s, which are kind of old, some dual proc machines, and some 8-way CPU databases.
Cool.
Basically, it's not cheap to do a benchmark because you need space, you need people, you need time, you need equipment. And so someone has to pay for it because I have to pay my salaries. And someone has to pay me if they want to use my developers.
Right.
I mean, to just net it all out. So no one does benchmarks altruistically. It could be done if you had a nonprofit organization that was independently funded somehow, and I don't think that's a bad idea because I think maybe that's what this industry needs around this area.
It's just not an economic reality, though.
It's not economic reality, but it's a whole other topic.
Right.
So anyway, so we published the results. Oracle fired something back, I think, pretty quickly saying it was bunk, but they retracted because they didn't have any supporting documentation. We published everything. I think there's over 140 pages or so of documentation, how the database was built, the test scripts. We even published the source code for the stupid line counting program.
Very good.
And that alone was controversial.
For the line counting program.
Oh, yeah, for the line counting program.
Cool.
So what do you consider a line of code? We even went and tried to find a third-party line counting application that we could use, and frankly, we're running out of time, and we just said, look, here's what we would consider to be a line of code. And we published the source code for that thing. So everything is controversial. It might look controversial, and maybe it looks like there's things might look more complex than they really are, but when it comes down to it, everything that we did in the .NET version was completely open and public, and here are the numbers. You should be able to do the same thing in your own lab. Benchmarking is not an easy thing to do, and there's definitely a certain art to it in terms of babysitting your computers and trying to figure out what's going on.
Freudian slip there. You have a child?
Babysitting? Yeah, I do.
In terms of babysitting.
Babysitting. I say that. You might have to edit that one out. You know what? It's kind of what it's like. In fact, one of the guys got a VCR and a TV and rented a bunch of movies to watch it as these scripts are going, because you want them to run for a long time.
Right.
And so it's not the most glamorous job, but at the end of the day, the results are pretty cool.
Hey, I was checking out MSDN online this week, looking at the article archives. There's so much good stuff in the article archives, it's not even funny. Things that I didn't even know was there. Look, check this out. Here's an article on multi-threaded programming with VisualBasic.net by Robert Burns of the Visual Studio team from February. And he talks about how to create new threads, synchronize threads, how to use timers, how to use thread pooling, and and it's all VB. There's also a great article in here called Security Concerns for VBNet and Visual C#.net Programmers, which introduces code access security and goes down into the details of web application security, dynamic discovery, authentication, impersonation and delegation, the ASP.NET process identity, and lots of great stuff. And this is all just plain English, really good stuff. Here's a really cool article, using VisualBasic.net to access Google's web service. Yeah, that's right. Did you know Google has published a web service? How to download the information that you need for the API and source code to just call it up. That's great. There's lots and lots of stuff already up there on the web for you to go look at and search through and find answers. And hey, just because an article is a couple of months old doesn't mean that it's not going to save you a lot of time and money. And that's what it's all about, isn't it, folks? All right, so coming up on .NET Rocks, Scott Stanfield talks about Pet Shop 2.0 and going forward, what happened and what's going to happen next. So stick around. You don't want to miss this.
So fast forward to Pet Shop 2.0.
Okay. Let me ask you, Pet Shop 2.0, was there both a Java version and a .NET version that were built? Where did the Java version come from?
We had nothing to do with the Java version. The middleware company built that.
Okay.
I think we may have answered some of the guys that worked on our version. We have probably clarified some of the intent behind our design to them because they had access to the source code. Everybody did. So I think our guys answered some questions that they may have had.
Was I accurate in how I introduced that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So what happened? So for version 2 or round 2, the Java guys at the middleware company stepped up and said, "We'll do it," and Microsoft funded their travel expense and maybe their time and paid for the lab, and we were only up there, I think, for about an additional month for version 2.0 because some of the code changed, and we made a few tweaks to the application. In fact, we're able to crank out another 25% boost in performance in only 2 weeks of tuning the app.
This is the J2EE version.
Well, we took Pet Shop 1.0 with the .NET version.
All right, hang on now. I'm confused. So the middleware company was doing a J2EE version, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and they weren't also doing a new .NET version?
No.
Okay.
We did the .NET version.
You did the new .NET version against that old one. All right.
So all the .NET numbers you see were based on code that we wrote.
Okay.
And we ran the benchmarks.
Okay.
In Microsoft's lab.
Now, what's the controversy going up around middleware?
Well, here's I think the controversy is. So imagine, Carl, that all of a sudden one day you post something on your website and say, "Hold on, we may have been wrong. Maybe what we're thinking about .NET might not have been true. Let's take a closer look at it in an effort to improve .NET." Okay. Well, in a sense, that's what middleware did because they're a well-respected consulting company in the Java community.
In the Java community.
Yeah, and to their credit, they said these are the results we found. And how are you going to argue with it? If they're not popular, they're not popular. I think to the Java community's credit in the forums there's a lot of people looking for controversy. There's a lot of people saying, "How could you do this to us?" But I think the ones who are taking the longer view are saying this is a good thing for our community. And I'm talking about our community, developers as a whole.
Before you defend the position, let's define the controversy.
So what they did, they came back and they did the write-up and said, these are the results that we found. Here are the .NET numbers versus our numbers, which they did on 2 different application platforms.
Right.
And there's a ton of charts and numbers and graphics. I think the bottom line is the .NET version was at least 2 times faster, and was a lot smaller in surface area in terms of the amount of code you have to manage.
All right, the answer I'm looking for is that Microsoft actually paid these guys for some part of this benchmark.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so that's what people don't know.
Yeah. So there's a couple things. One is there's an email that Greg Leak sent out internally to brief Microsoft at the field level,
right,
to say they've got the numbers. He's going to go talk to some analysts, and by the way, here's what they found. And those kinds of emails go out every day in a large organization, right, especially if you have products.
But the idea is that the Java community saw this and pointed to it, and somebody put it up on a website and said...
somehow it was leaked. If you look at the email at the top of the subject line, it says confidential, do not distribute. And so as soon as you say that, it looks controversial.
Right, exactly.
And juicy. There's nothing that interesting in it aside from a few internal share names that Microsoft has.
I've been following the whole thread on the RD list, and we had some replies from Microsoft, and their position is pretty, actually very, very good, which is that for the longest time they have been trying to engage Sun directly on hiring a third party to do some benchmarks.
Yeah,
and Sun has never agreed.
Yeah, that's right.
And so they had no choice but to go to a third party. So when you say that they paid them, what they paid for was exactly the kind of expense you were talking about.
Oh yeah,
the expense of setting up the lab.
Yeah, I think the middleware company had 2 people on site there for like 4 months or something like that.
But the Java community is trying to insinuate that Microsoft somehow affected the turnout, and convinced them through some sort of
Yeah, but listen, so Microsoft doesn't control what the middleware company says.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the question. I mean, are we saying that the middleware company is able to be paid off for such an important I don't think so.
Yeah, they're not going to risk their reputation.
Of course not.
On a benchmark.
That's just a stupid argument. So the reason I wanted to bring up the controversy is just, this is what they're saying.
Yeah.
And then the reality is that, if you're a company who your reputation and the numbers that you publish have to be right. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're in the toilet.
Yeah. So here's the deal. We totally stand by the .NET numbers. We didn't have anything to do with the Java side.
Okay.
But it was done on the same equipment, and I imagine they knew what they're doing. I think Greg had someone in the lab to assist running the benchmarks because it's a pretty time-consuming process.
Right.
But the bottom line is someone's got to step up and pay for this work.
Right.
It's not cheap. And Microsoft, to their credit, I believe, was willing to go all the way with this thing and said, look, if we don't get the numbers we want, we don't get the numbers we want. And the middleware company is going to come out looking really good for beating Microsoft.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't. And that's not to say that it's the end-all. Is Java faster than .NET? It depends. For the Pet Shop application, that Pet Shop 2.0, that was load-tested at the Microsoft lab, it was not faster.
Mm-hmm.
Did Microsoft influence the numbers? No freaking way.
No way.
We would not be a part of that. There's just no way.
Yeah.
Right, and that's too big of a risk for them as well.
Well, at a certain point, we got to step back from this. We're all, I think a lot of us in this community have maybe a science background or a science bent, and it's a meritocracy in a lot of software companies where the best ideas win. And we like to think that the truth will vet everything out. And now it might get a little more complicated when you start tying in marketing and the fact that these companies have products and maybe a lot of money at stake. But the bottom line is this is a sign of competition. It's pure competition. And if anything, both platforms are going to become faster from this, which is a good thing. Isn't this what the whole anti-competitive monopoly thing was about?
Right.
If Microsoft really wanted to, frankly, all the big companies, and Microsoft, IBM, BEA, Sun, and Oracle, I guess are the top application server providers, they could all just say nothing. And what you would find is that developers would go down a path expecting a certain level of performance and not get it. What they're doing, they're putting their money where their mouth is and say, we believe that .NET is not only faster, it's going to be smaller in terms of the amount of code you have to write and maintain, and it's just going to be a better experience. Now, is it a perfect app? No. We already know there's a few things we want to change in 2.0 in terms of decoupling some middle-tier layers from each other. It's not perfect, but given the constraints that we had to build it in the time frame.
Yeah. What were the final numbers, basically, on your 2.0 versus middleware's 2.0?
I think for the best middleware numbers they had, we were roughly 2 times faster.
Wow.
So they really closed the gap, which is to their credit. I'm not surprised because they did it with some code that probably wasn't written with performance in mind in the first place.
Okay, now that's
and
interesting.
There's a pretty good list of changes that they made to the original Pet Shop implementation,
okay.
Which were a way for them to gain further performance. And frankly, in looking at some of the comments that the Java folks have on the forum, there's probably room for a lot better improvement.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say there's going to be not room for improvement in the .NET world, because it's mostly a matter of function. It's a function of time and money. How much,
right.
Which are the same thing. How much time can you put into this application before the law of diminishing returns kicks in, and you're just not going to make it any faster?
That's right. That's one thing that struck me when I read over the document on the middleware site. You know, they mentioned the optimization that went on with Pet Shop 2. I think it says you devoted one guy to a week.
It's 2 weeks.
Or to 2 weeks. Right. So 2 man weeks, basically. And then I want to say they had 5 developers working on the Java app for a longer period of time.
The number in my head, I never met the guys. I'm not sure. I thought they had 2 people working pretty much full time for about 4 months. You know, whatever they say on their site in their FAQ is the truth. I don't totally know for sure. We didn't have much of a part in that.
Right. Well, just like the benchmark numbers as far as performance, the time involved, there was a huge disparity between the two.
Yeah. Well, think of it this way. And this is another good point that I think we should focus on. In the .NET world, we have one company that is accountable for everything that we do, and that's Microsoft. They have to make sure all their toys play well together. And I'm talking ADO.NET, SQL Server, the .NET Framework, and the language, and IIS 6, and Win2K, or Windows.NET Server. I think we probably did both. And if you take all those components out and start, those little toys you have where you twist the pants, you twist the body, you twist the head, and get like a different monster depending on the configuration. Well, the Java community calls that choice. And the problem is you might choose a 3-headed monster that's not going to give you support. And we've seen this happen. So imagine if you got a third-party database driver to talk to Oracle, and you're building an application on, say, WebSphere. If you have some problem, which company do you think is going to own up to the problem? None of them. They're all going to be pointing fingers at each other. So in a way, doing everything on the same platform gives you a better degree of accountability. So you call one number through PSS, Premier Support, and they're going to get to the bottom of it. And I know because we've been on calls like that.
That's a very good point, Scott.
Now, the nice thing is if you don't like their implementation of something, don't use it, because you can still go around it. You can use the direct SQL Server library. You've got, God knows, probably 3 different ways to talk to SQL Server. But the nice thing is the way that they give you in .NET, the simple way tends to be the best and the fastest. So there's a certain amount of elegance that we've come to respect in .NET, that not only do they kind of get it right, and they get it right when you're typing code and you kind of guess at the name of a method.
Right, and it's
kind
there.
of this little synchronicity you get. But as it turns out, that way also happens to be pretty fast. So when you can have high performance, high scalability, and relatively secure code, and it's also just the surface area is a lot smaller, it means you have less code to maintain. You have one company to go to if you have problems. Frankly, it frees up more time for you to take a cooking class.
Very good.
And at the end of the day, that's, we've got to move on,
so
because there's always going to be controversies, and
right.
This is certainly an interesting one, and I think nothing but good is going to come from this in both communities.
I agree.
But we're all developers, and we're all architects, the people working on these problems, and yeah, there's some people that are deeply bitter about this, and I don't know if they had a bad experience with a video device driver with Windows, because Lord knows we've all had those problems, but there are just a lot of people that don't like Microsoft, and I don't know if you guys knew that.
Oh, I had an idea.
You have an inkling?
Yeah, I had an idea.
Yeah, I live in a cave. I was not aware of that. I thought everybody loved Microsoft.
Well, the thing is like you said, Microsoft was always about getting the tools out there, even if there wasn't the best API for programming it at the time.
Yeah.
And, the smartest people would be able to figure it out, and it would, we would all learn from each other. And they did have some issues in the past about not knowing what was going on in the Unix world, and therefore, what are some of the problems that had been solved by those guys.
Yeah.
And they took some criticism for not, opening their eyes enough and learning from the mistakes on other platforms.
Yeah, that's true.
But those days are over. I've seen that with .NET, that they've taken the best of everything.
It's big. And now when we as developers talk about .NET, we mean the .NET framework and the languages. We don't mean, the .NET line of server products necessarily. And I think, or Passport, or all these other things that Microsoft has been criticized for not having a clear, coherent message on .NET. What does that really mean?
Right.
And that's too bad. And it's up to in the right circumstances. I think that's going to be fixed.
Well, Scott, we have an email question from your friend and mine, Yuval Lowy, who is ironically just having a beer with you last night.
That's right. He had cranberry juice. I had an old-fashioned. So
okay. Well,
we'll get it straight.
That's right. He did not say a beer. He said a drink.
It was a drink.
So that leaves it open for debate, which was a discussion you guys were talking, a story about Cisco brought it up, where there's always so much focus on the technologies and the merits of the technologies, Java versus .NET, but nobody really thinks about the human factors, job security, empire building, and things like that. So what do you think?
Yeah, let's face it. We pour a tremendous amount of time into our professional life. And when someone comes out and potentially criticizes or says that there is a better way to do something, it's natural for people to take offense to that. And that's not even a good thing to say. I think it's good to say in the sense of building the community that, hey, there's always room for improvement and that we're going to make our systems faster, more scalable, maybe less work for you to maintain over time, because ultimately we serve we're a capitalistic society, right?
Right.
So we serve the companies that we are working for, and they're all about increasing revenue and reducing cost. That's all it boils down to. It's a very simple P&L. And if we find ways to get the job done faster, yet not shooting ourselves in the foot down the road for code maintenance and total cost of ownership issues, then that's a really good thing. And frankly, I've never found an end user that has complained that said, your application's too fast. Can you please slow it down? So when you can have the best...
Except when you were running old EGA graphics games on...
Isn't that funny? That was the turbo switch.
That's right.
That was the turbo switch. You can slow it down so you can get to the final level. Yeah, it's
there are little programs that you could write that would hook the timer interrupt and just put 4 next loops in there in assembler, to slow down the processor.
And on the other end of the extreme, there's this whole underground of overclocking.
Right.
So where people would take hot rods and soup them up for sideshows and street racing, people are doing the same thing but with computers and really pushing them to the limit. People got a lot of time in their hands.
I know it.
Yeah, not everybody wants to submerge their PC in liquid nitrogen, though. And, that's what you see happening out there.
So the conversation I had with Yuval last night is he was saying that if he was telling somebody, I guess to somebody at Cisco, that .NET is going to reduce your total cost of ownership, and that's a fancy way of saying you get more for less. That wasn't necessarily a message this guy wanted to hear, because internally he was writing applications for other groups in their company, and so in a sense he had to kind of charge those other groups within the company money to do it. And so if all of a sudden his price goes down for an application, say it goes down from $1 million to $500,000, he'll get more work for his group. Maybe the workload will double, but he won't necessarily get more headcount to build those applications. So then we start to step back and say, wow, so pure technology isn't a means to an end. There's actually people involved. There's business decisions that are made. A lot of times, and the pure technology folks, especially a lot of the RDs, it's easy to get sucked into minutia and programming, and it's intoxicating, because frankly we have fun learning new things. Yet when you have to balance it back with the real world and the human factors with people, that's a little more nebulous and a challenging thing for us to do.
At one point in the past, I had this revelation that since the aim of software development was to automate processes that are done by people, that eventually the only job left in America will be computer programmer.
Well, 2 jobs, computer programming and battery management. I can't tell you how much of my day is spent maintaining my fleet of batteries between my camcorder, my BlackBerry, my cell phone, my iPad, my digital camera. I'm probably leaving a few out. Thank God I don't have an electric car. Yeah,
Well, you may in the future.
Batteries are going to rule us. we will be slaves to batteries. That's a scary thought. Oh yeah, my laptop has a battery too.
Well, I'd like to keep you aware of what's going on here at Franklin's Net. We have just got our class schedule for the first 5 months of 2003 online. 7 VB.net master classes on schedule from January to May. Also, we're going to be publishing a lot more how-to videos. Our how-to videos have been very popular, especially the author binding video. We're going to be putting a whole bunch of new videos up there in the coming days, so stay tuned for that. And also, Sunny Day our old friend Sunny Day will be doing some videos, and the first one is coming up next week. As always, we are continuing to put code snippets that we find interesting online for you to download for free. So if you're not already on our mailing list, please sign up, and we will give you notifications of new .NET Rock shows and who's on, and when they go online. Not only that, but you'll get our .NET newsletter once a month, where we pass along tips and code and little bits of news that we've learned throughout the month for free. Now stick around for more with Scott Stanfield and Mark Dunn and myself right here on .NET Rocks. Don't you go away.
So job security.
Yeah, you talk about job security for developers. Developers go through this enlightenment process. Imagine, if you will, classifying developers into 3 camps. For lack of a better word, beginner, intermediate, and expert. And kind of chart their growth over time from beginner to an expert. And then on the y-axis, you chart something else. Maybe it's ego. Beginner is willing to admit what they don't know because they know they can't, hoodwink people into thinking what they don't know.
Right.
Yeah, at intermediate, the curve jumps up, like it bumps like a standard distribution, because they're kind of expected to know everything by now. But by the time you get to the expert, they're comfortable saying what they don't know, and they realize there's lots of ways to solve a problem. And yet they retain the facilities to explore other technical avenues and don't get bothered by things like, oh, this application's 18 times faster than that other one, because given enough time, they can probably solve the problem.
Right.
At a certain point, everything's just a Turing machine. And you can optimize at that level, make almost anything go faster.
So didn't I see you on the World Series?
I did. I caught a foul ball on the top of the 5th inning off David Eckstein.
And you turned around,
shortstop.
And you turned around to the crowd, though. We didn't really see much of your face.
I turned to the crowd. I did. And about a half a second later, I turned to the center field cameras. But I was just so surprised I caught the darn ball. And the Giants went on to win that game 16-4, which was pretty fabulous to be there. And
wow.
I was right in the Giants bullpen, right in the dirt there, and that was pretty cool.
Did you have a glove, or did you catch it with your bare hands?
Got to bring a glove.
Oh yeah.
Bring a glove, you get a ball. Don't bring a glove, you're gonna have broken fingers.
I was teaching a class, and I got an email from Tim Huckabee. Sent it to the RD list. He says, I swear to God, I just saw Scott Stanfield catch a fly ball.
I can't believe he recognized me from that. I was only on TV for about 4 seconds. And you're right, I mostly had my back to the audience, but he probably recognized my superior game, ball handling skills.
Uh-huh.
It was a one-hop seam. It was probably going about 90 miles an hour. So he probably thought there's only one person in that crowd that could have caught that ball. That's what I'm guessing.
Well, we'll put a link on the show page to the
little video?
Streaming video of you catching that ball.
It's my proud moment.
Right.
I would trade that ball, though, for a win with the Giants in Game 6.
Well, you can't have everything.
No, can't have everything.
So what are you working on right now?
Unfortunately, there's some pretty cool stuff that we're doing that I can't say anything about. It's a real bummer.
Oh, yes, you can.
No, I can't.
Yeah, you can. It's just
We're
you
not
and me.
going to tell anybody. Trust us.
There's just more good stuff coming, more of the same. We got Everett, the launch of Everett coming up early next year, along with Windows.NET Server. Windows.NET Server looks awesome.
Oh, yeah.
With IIS 6, it's going to make our applications run faster. You got kernel-level caching for websites. You've got MSMQ features, which I love. I love asynchronous processing. It makes your systems go faster because, frankly, people in the real world don't care if it takes 1 second or 1.5 seconds to do work.
Right, exactly.
A lot of times,
It's not going to make your form load any slower.
Exactly. So use asynchronous processing for things that don't need real-time input.
Yeah.
And that's a key to building fast systems.
Are you working on a new kind of demo project to showcase what you can do with any of the new technology?
You'll see us continuing to do work for the ASP.NET team and also the Windows Forms team. And we've done some dabbling in security and try to build hack-proof ASP.NET web apps. There's a fantastic 600 or so page PDF that Microsoft put out recently, which I highly recommend. Full of good practical information that you can find on MSDN.
I think I've found that shortly after they put it out and emailed it to Carl late one night.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a
great
good thing.
document.
I would recommend taking it to Kinko's if you want to print it out, though. It's a monster. It doesn't mean that it's hard. It just covers a lot of concepts. Security is hard. It requires a different mindset. Implementing good, secure ASP.NET applications is not hard. It just requires some thought from the beginning.
Yep.
I'd say there's a few areas that, as programmers, we just don't pay attention to. Security, globalization. When's the last time you've written an application so it can be translated to French or
Actually, now that's
Japanese?
much easier because everything's Unicode.
Exactly. Unicode's definitely a step in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
So little things like that to really kind of the fit and finish of a good application, or the hallmark of a good developer, is understanding those. And the one thing, if I could give people advice, web developers in general, it is to know and love your database, or know and love your database administrator.
Ooh, yeah.
Because it's an area that
feels good.
It just baffles me that people still don't want to use stored procedures, or they don't pay attention to the database design, or they don't use referential integrity, they don't use triggers, they don't pay attention to the thing that's 1,000 times slower than the CPU.
Yeah, they need to come to the 3-day SQL Knuckle Buster at Franklin's Net.
Yeah, that's right, man. I mean, I'm very passionate about those topics.
It drives me nuts, and it's not hard. It's a different way of thinking, this relational way of thinking about data. I was using SQL Server back when it was the joint relationship between Sybase, and it only ran on OS2, and that was challenging. And I really learned it from the ground up there, and I just had a good appreciation for databases since then. And 95% of the applications that we build, at least here at Vertigo, have a database involved. And if your goal,
what are the other 5%?
I'm actually trying to think of something. I thought of a Pocket PC app, but it uses SQL CE.
That's, Pat Hines posed that question. He said, somebody told me that 95 or 99 or 95, I think it was, 95% of applications are all database. So
okay,
what are the other 5?
I guess Notepad.
Yeah, a calculator maybe.
yeah. They all use a database. So why not just spend some time, get comfortable with the database. You'll be a much more effective programmer, and your systems will run a lot faster.
Yeah.
Think about it. You're dealing with a platter that spins. It's a physical thing that moves, and if it's an inefficient query, and you have to wait for that seek head to move laterally or wait for the disk to spin around, you could have executed, I don't know how many millions of instructions you could have executed in the meantime. So instead of focusing on a super cool design pattern, put a little bit more effort into the database. And the thing is, once you get a fast database, you can offload a lot of your business logic to the database, which some people are not going to like that idea, because they say, well, what if you switch databases? Well, unless you're an ISV building an application that you want to sell to run on multiple databases, I challenge you to find a system that you've moved to a different database.
I think the Sunblad brothers have the best reference on that. Where does business logic go in their book? And they're coming out with a new one for .NET.
I would say it goes closest to the data as possible.
Right. That's what they say.
And now with web services, you can expose data on SQL Server so that anybody can access it.
And with Yukon, you'll be able to write those stored procs in VBNet.
Don't. This is my one pet peeve. Why, and the SQL guys might not like me for this, but why would you write a procedural-oriented method for accessing data in a database when you have a perfectly good language of T-SQL? Maybe it's a way to get more functional programming or object-oriented programming people into the fold.
Yeah, it's the new variant.
Access. But man, I have not seen it, so my first reaction is somewhat, why are we doing this? Just have them learn SQL instead. But we'll see what they do.
Yeah, I look at it the same way. It's going to be weird for me to see a stored proc written in VBNet or C#.
I tell you what, though, that's the first thing that I want to nail down when I see that is what do I think about this?
Yeah, I agree. And frankly, I've been fighting the stored procedure battle for so long. The first version of Pet Shop used stored procedures, and we got hammered for it.
Why?
Say, well, that's SQL Server specific, and you shouldn't be using them. So
Oracle used PL SQL procedures,
they're different,
right?
though. They're different. And so what we did, we went back and pulled them out, and sure enough, it's just as fast. You don't use stored procedures for speed. You used to in SQL 6.5 because it was a precompiled execution path. The reason why you use stored procedures are twofold. You abstract the database layout from the people doing the middle tier programming or the business logic and code, such that if you need to change the name of your table or change the way a table is organized, you don't have to go back and recompile your source code. Secondly, and more importantly now, it's a funnel for security. You can make it such that all your web applications are only allowed to execute stored procs. Not only does it give you a smaller surface area of attack, it also makes it easier to do parameter validation to protect yourself from SQL injection attacks. And frankly, it's
SQL injection attacks?
It's very difficult to do a SQL injection attack if you're going through stored procedures.
You mean a rogue program going out there and messing with your database?
SQL injection attacks are fascinating. Imagine you have a web page which says, please log in, enter your name and password. Okay? So you have two text boxes. One's a text field and the other's with the asterisk in HTML. I forgot what it's called. It's another input box.
Yeah, password box.
And you take those two parameters in your code, and you have something like this. Select user ID from users, where username equals, and then the name of the text box, and password equals the name coming from the text box.
Yeah.
So you construct that with little plus signs and quote marks, and I will hack you so fast your head will spin. Because in the username box, I can put equals quote, quote, or
got it.
Blah, 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 tick mark, SP_XP command shell.
Yeah. Command.exe.
Format SQL or whatever. It's so easy to jump out. If you're building a select statement, if you're constructing a select statement on the fly, you're totally vulnerable to what's called a SQL injection attack. There's also an HTML injection attack.
That's the one that the Code Red virus used.
I think it used that to break into IIS or something like that.
Well, it used that to go down to the command.exe and shell out, which was an amazing thing. I can't believe that, after so many versions of Windows, that was still possible.
I know. There's all kinds of side effects that are preserved in the name of compatibility that we see in the OS and other things. And that's something, actually, one of the reasons why I'm excited about Windows.NET Server for web servers. Windows.NET Server 2003 Web Edition. That's the official name. Because we'll have a version that's just for serving up web applications, which would be nice.
Mark Anders talked a little bit about that, and I encourage everyone listening to go back and listen to the Mark Anders interview where he talked about .NET Server. And you hinted at it a little bit, but just a much, much more efficient way to serve up web pages.
Well, not only is it faster,
it's closer to the processor.
Exactly. It's a kernel mode level, so it's blazingly fast. There's some ways of CPU throttling that you can lay out, scheduling, saying I've got this batch job, give it higher priority at night when no one cares about, performance of the system overall. It's got the way it handles caching now in IIS is really nice.
But remember, Scott, .NET is a platform for hosting web services. So just remember that all the time.
Okay, I will remember that. We are using web services. We actually are. There's cases where it makes a lot of sense. It's
well, I'm being facetious, of course, because
I know.
The marketing message missed the mark.
There is the Gartner hype cycle or whatever they call it.
Yeah.
Just like any new technology, remember multimedia was the big thing, and then peer-to-peer was going to be the big thing. And
PenOS.
Yeah, PenOS. These things kind of they come and go. The difference with web services, I think, is that it's going to survive because it's based on open standards that everybody agrees with.
Right.
And it's actually working. It's a relatively elegant solution to a complex problem.
Yep, it's working very well.
And we know how humans talk to computers over the web. That's with a browser. How do we computers talking to other computers over the web? And that's through SOAP and web services. And it works pretty well.
Okay, Scott, we have a caller on the line. Dennis Jefferson, you have a question for Scott?
Yeah. When you did the pet shop thing, you used the data repeater a lot instead of the data grid. And I was wondering why you did that, and when might you choose the data grid instead?
Oh, that's a good question. The data repeater is definitely simpler in terms of its functionality. The data grid gives you a ton of functionality, but I'm trying to think of this specific example. I believe there was a case where we had to do paging or something, and maybe the formatting or the
sorting
kind of
and paging,
functionality-
maybe?
Yeah, maybe the functionality we're getting with the data grid didn't exactly match the end user experience you'd get with the Java version. And remember, we wanted the UI to be identical, totally identical, except for the images for copyright reasons. So where we may have used a data grid because you get a lot of easy functionality, we might have actually made the decision to go with the data repeater to get perfect parity in the functionality. And see, that's not something that you, as an engineer or an architect, you might not have to deal with that, because I'm a big fan of saying, hey, if you've got code like a data grid that makes it very easy to do sorting and just displaying columns of data with paging involved, but if it doesn't totally match the requirements from UI perspective, change them. Change the requirements. Because for something like that, where you get a lot of functionality for very little code, it's just overall savings in the amount of code you have to maintain and potential bugs and how long it takes you to write it. Because if it's something very trivial, then you could probably use a data grid. But we may have had to go with a data repeater because we didn't get the exact matching functionality. So that's unique to the benchmark. Now, it may also be, too, the data repeater may be faster.
I was going to ask if there was maybe some sort of efficiency choice there.
Yeah, there may be, because we're always looking at a couple things. We have a fine line between high performance and writing a lot of code. So if you get good performance and less code at the same time, I think that's a good thing. So the beauty of it, though, is if you come across a situation where you're trying to decide, do I use a data repeater or data grid? Now, I know the pet shop, they use a data repeater, but for my case, I'm not so sure. Well, here's what you do. Write a very simple case that mimics what your application is going to do eventually on two separate web pages. We'll call one data grid, call the other data repeater. And then if you have got Visual Studio.NET Enterprise Edition, you have this thing called Application Center Test. It's something that not a lot of people know about, but we call it ACT, or App Center Test.
Yeah, that's the new version of Homer, right?
That's right. Okay. And it's a lot sexier looking with nice big numbers and graphs and stuff. It's very easy to build up a very simple test case where you just hammer that page to see the maximum number of requests per second. Now, even if you do it on your development box, or you maybe have a small developer server, you're looking for relative performance. You're not looking for absolute performance. And if you find that the relative performance between the two is a factor of 4, maybe that's important to you.
Mm-hmm.
In a performance-oriented benchmark, it is important. So we'd probably be willing to go with the data repeater because it's still in the palette of useful tools that we can use. It may also be that the way you maintain paging, I know that was a difficult thing to do fast in. I mean, think about it. If you have a search result that returns 10,000 items. Do you display all 10,000 on the web page? No, you probably page 20 of them at a time, or something like that. Better yet, if you got more than 10,000, ask the user to be more precise and don't even show them. Say, your search returned too many results, please narrow it down. That'll give you better performance. But let's say you do have to use some kind of paging mechanism. It may have been that we got a better performance with the data reader.
Okay, well, that's great. I appreciate that.
That's a good question.
Awesome. Thanks, Dennis.
Yeah, those kinds of, frankly, what I find fascinating about these projects is the why we did things. And that's a really hard thing to capture as you go, because you almost need someone looking over your shoulder the whole time, say, wait a minute, why did you just pull the data grid out instead of the data reader? And it may be something like, well, we did some load testing and we thought we'd get better performance on this page. Let's try a data reader instead and see what it does. Sure enough, it's better, and you move on. But maybe if you had someone looking over your shoulder, say, but the data grid has this feature, which would be nice for the user, or it's just simply less code. It'd be nice to have a guardian angel over our shoulders. Maybe that's what extreme programming is about.
Extra price, I thought.
Yeah, extra price. I personally really find myself to be most productive when I was programming, when I did it in pairs. I did it with somebody else. It's a lot more fun that way.
Right. Hey, Scott, I wanted to go back to what you mentioned about the stored procedures earlier. In the version 2 of the Pet Store, you took stored procs out, so it would be on a level playing field with the Java version.
Yeah.
Did you see any kind of noticeable decrease in speed when you did that?
No, nothing noticeable at the level we were running it at.
Right, and that's one thing that surprised me. I generally look at stored procedures as being a way to improve performance.
Yeah, that was a good argument in 6.5 and the 7.0 days, and I think around 7.0 or 2000, SQL Server 2000, they're also caching the execution plan for
any queries coming through.
So that's why I say there's the two real arguments now are encapsulation and security. You get a tighter security path, and you get to encapsulate the data behind it. And one of the things I do in simple demos, I build a stored procedure that returns some data, and I build a WinForm that uses it through a web service. And then I say, oh, but the data is not sorted. Well, you could sort it in the middle tier by sorting the data set. You could sort it in the data grid. Or you can just go to the stored proc and add an order by clause. And you just refresh on your app, and boom, it's sorted. Just to show people that you can make changes at the stored procedure level that do have effect all the way back up. Now, that can be a dangerous thing, no doubt. I mean, you can change, have a fundamental impact. Your application just might break. But
you should know it's an option that you have.
Yeah, that's right. It's definitely an option.
Well, Scott, before we say goodbye, do you have any favorite tools that you found out there, either third-party things you pay for or things you download for free that you think are just too cool to let go?
I got this thing called WinKey, which lets me map the underused Windows key to anything. So Window I brings up Internet Explorer. Windows Shift O, my computer brings up The Onion. Windows Shift B brings up, I mapped it to bring up the Major League Baseball score page. It's just a little tool I've been using forever. I'm not even sure where it is. Maybe I can send you a link. Also, there's a utility, because I'm such a fan of the Windows key, we use IBM ThinkPads. They don't have a Windows key. It drives me nuts. So we wrote myself and one of the developers here wrote a little program to intercept all the keyboard events and map the right control key to the Windows key.
Very cool.
And if you're a Windows key addict like I am, then that would be a good addition to your portfolio. Probably not what you're expecting, huh?
No, that's perfect.
Yeah.
In fact,
we need that link.
Yeah, we'll get that link up there. So listen, any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
Yeah, the final thoughts. Just look. The benchmark thing with Pet Shop. It's at the end of the day, we're going to look back on this and say it was pretty cool that this happened, because as a result, as the end user of all these tools, whether or not you're in the Java community or Microsoft, you're going to get a better product, and that's what competition's about.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, Scott, from Mark and myself, I want to thank you for coming on the show and continuing to enlighten the world with especially this particular issue, and just in general about .NET. Keep on rocking, buddy.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks very much. We'll see you next time.